guys, welcome to our histology lecture. Today we're going to talk about the histology of the gastrointestinal tract. Right. So, general features of the general function of the gastrointestinal tract is to process, assimilate, and expulsion of waste products. So, in processing, you can have mechanical, you can have chemical, right? Mechanical can also involve things like mastication. The chemical we can include things like that is to do with enzymes, right? So the regions of the GIT include. We are going to talk about the histology of the esophagus, the stomach, the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, the large intestines, up to the anal canal. Right. So you before you get into specific regions, you have to understand the wall, the basic structure of the GIT. The basic structure of the wall of the GIT is going to be categorized into four. You're going to move from inside going to outside. Let's start. You're going to have a layer called the mucosa. The mucosa is a layer that is classified into three. You have your epithelium. Now, your epithelium is endodermal in origin, and it is different depending on the functionality of the part of the GIT. So the epithelium in the esophagus, for example, is going to be stratified, non-keratinized squamous epithelium. And that of the rest of the GIT up to the upper half of the anal canal is going to be simple columnar epithelium. Below the epithelia, you're going to have a loose or areolar connective tissue that is called your lamina propria. In the lamina propria, that's where you find small blood capillaries, nerves, and lymphatics. Remember, your epithelia is avascular, which means it depends on the vascularity that will be coming from the lamina propria. After the lamina propria, we are going to have the muscularis mucosa. The muscularis mucosa is a layer of smooth muscle which is found in the mucosa that is responsible for the folding and the movement of the villi of the mucosa to increase its activity. Below the muscularis mucosa, so the muscularis mucosa is going to be the demarcation between the mucosa and the submucosa. Let's take a look at the submucosa. The submucosa is going to contain dense, irregular connective tissue. And in some parts of the GIT, it is the submucosa that is going to contain glands. And these are common in two areas of the GIT. In the esophagus, you have glands in the submucosa, Mucous glands. And in the duodenum, you're going to have a Brannus glands. So you may find Brannus glands in the duodenum and esophageal cardiac glands in the esophagus. those are specifically found in the submucosa. Remember, the GIT tract is exposed to the external environment. So you have the largest aggregation of lymphoid nodules right along your GIT tract. So you may as well find some lymphatic nodules right in the lamina propria and as well in the submucosa. Done. Let's take a look at the Muscularis Externa. The Muscularis Externa is going to be the muscle that is going to facilitate what you call peristalsis, which is the movement of food bolus throughout the GIT. So depending on the region, the Muscularis Externa mainly is gonna be classified into two: an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer. But right in the stomach, the Muscularis Externa is going to have three layers. It's going to have an inner oblique layer, a mid-circular layer, and an outer longitudinal layer. The outermost layer of the GIT is going to be called Adventitia or Serosa. If you remember very well, we said our GIT is intraperitoneal organs and retroperitoneal organs. What are intraperitoneal organs? These are organs that are completely surrounded by peritoneum, which means they are attached to the mesenteries. Organs that include the stomach, the spleen, the small intestines, the transverse colon, and all those things. We also have a retroperitoneal organs, like we have the esophagus, especially the thoracic esophagus. We have the lower portion of the duodenum, the ascending and the descending colon. These, they are covered by peritoneum only in the anterior aspect, but at the posterior aspect, they sit directly to the posterior abdominal wall. So in other terms, they are going to have adventitia, not serosa, because adventitia is going to allow these structures to blend in with the surrounding structures. But those organs that have serosa, they are going to be covered by a thin mesothelium layer of simple squamous epithelium, which is becoming from the peritoneal layers. So basically, those are the general features of the GIT tract histology. So this is a schematic diagram that shows the wall of your GIT. So this is going to be your lumen, right? And then you are going to have your epithelial lining the lumen. You can actually see, and you can actually appreciate that the lumen has folds, it is folded, and the folding are due to the muscularis mucosa that we spoke about. You see, so this is going to be your lamina propria, and inside the lamina propria, we said is highly vascularized, and you're going to have a lymphoid nodules. You can appreciate a lymphoid nodule here, which is a gout. Gastrointestinal associated lymphatic system, right? And then you're going to have this layer of smooth muscle, that's your muscularis mucosa. And the muscularis mucosa, the lamina propria from the submucosa itself. So this right here becomes your submucosa, and the submucosa is characterized by larger blood vessels. And it is right in this submucosa where you are going to find what you call the Meissner plexus. The Meissner plexus. So the Meissner plexus, or the submucosal plexus, is found right in the submucosa. right here. And then that's you can also find glands, submucosal glands, if it is the esophagus, if it the Branus glands, if it is the duodenum, right? And then this outer layer is gonna be your muscularis externa, which is divided into two in most part of the GIT. This is gonna be your inner circular layer, and this is gonna be your outer longitudinal layer. And between the inner and the outer longitudinal layer, you have another plexus, which is called the Albrecht plexus or the mesenteric plexus, found here. And it is this plexus, the mesenteric plexus plus the Meissner plexus in submucosa, will form the enteric plexus of the GIT. Very important, very important. And our last layer, in this case, this is gonna be your serosa, because you can actually see that there is a dorsal mesentery here that is completely surrounding GIT. So there is a serosa, and wherever there is serosa, there is mesothelium. Wherever there is mesothelium, there is a simbu squamous epithelium. You understand, right? Good. Let's see another diagram. Right, this is another schematic diagram that is going to help us to see the layers. Another, you can actually see the folding in the epithelial lining, and you can appreciate these some glands, right, bridging into the submucosa, right. You can actually appreciate that this is your mucosa, right, and it's gonna be having epithelia, and then lamina propria, loose connective tissue, and then a smooth muscle called the muscularis mucosa. This is responsible for mucosal motility, right? And then you're going to have this layer of dense irregular connective tissue. That's your submucosa. And you may find, that's where you find the submucosal plexus, which we say the what? The Meissner plexus. So the Meissner plexus, the S, which means it's a submucosal plexus, right? Since submucosa starts with an S, the Meissner is an S. You understand now? Good. And then you're going to have your muscularis externa, and right in the muscularis externa, between the inner circular and the outer longitudinal, you have a plexus called the mesenteric plexus. So this is your mesenteric plexus. This is responsible for muscle contraction, for peristalsis. Then the outer layer, right, this is going to be your serosa. Your serosa. You understand? Right, so another schematic diagram again for you to get these layers in your head. So this is gonna be your mucosa divided into three. Your epithelia, that is usually simple columnar epithelia. Your lamina propria with some aggregation of mucosa associated lymphatic tissue, which are lymphatic nodules with no capsule at all, right? And then you're also going to have this muscle, smooth muscle for mucosa motility, that's your muscularis mucosa, right? And then from the muscularis mucosa, we are going to have the submucosa. In the submucosa, if it is the duodenum, you're going to have these glands. If it is the esophagus, you're also going to have these glands. But in other regions, we don't have glands in the submucosa, right? And the submucosa is lined by this plexus, which is called the submucosal nerve plexus. And it is the submucosal nerve plexus that is also called the Meissner plexus, right? And then we are going to have this layer that is called the muscularis externa. You can actually see this is inner circular and this is an outer circular. Between the inner circular and outer circular, you're going to have this plexus that is called the mesenteric plexus, or the the Uberg plexus. So these plexus, the Uberg plexus or the mesenteric plexus, plus the submucosal plexus and the masonal plexus will form the enteric plexus, right? And then you can actually now see this is your serosa, this is your mesentery with supplying the neurovascular structures to your GIT. So let's basically take a look at the innervation of the GIT. So the GIT is going to be innervated by parasympathetic system, and that is going to be a stimulatory, and then the sympathetic system is going to be inhibitory, right? So the parasympathetic system is going to come from the vagus nerve, right, and the craniosacral outflow coming from the lumbar, which would be your pelvic splanchnic nerve. What does it does? So it stimulates peristalsis, inhibits sphincter muscles, so it relaxes the sphincters and triggers secretory activities. That's the parasympathetic. And this is brought by the masonal and the mesenteric plexus are part of this parasympathetic nervous system. As for the sympathetic is going to come from the splanchnic nerves, and it's going to be responsible for inhibition of peristalsis and activates the contraction of sphincter muscles. Right, so now let's take a look at the esophagus. The esophagus. Now, the esophagus has the mucosa, that is the epithelium lamina propria, and as well as the muscularis mucosa. So the mucosa of the esophagus is going to be stratified, squamous, non-keratinized epithelium. And this mucosa, it contains what called Langerhans cells, right? And it is very important to take note of this, that the mucosa is going to have glands in the submucosa that are called esophageal glands. Esophageal glands, right? And when the esophagus is now entering the stomach, you're going to have what you call esophageal cardiac glands. They are present at the junction of the stomach and the esophagus. You understand? Now, the submucosa houses esophageal glands proper, which are tubular-acinar glands with a seromucous glands, right? So these glands, they do not produce alkalinic fluid, but rather the mucus or the secretions that are being produced, they are just for gut motility and less of um, acid neutralization. Right, let's take a look at the muscularis externa of the esophagus. That's one thing that you have to understand. So the esophagus is divided into thirds: upper third, middle third, lower third. The upper third is going to have the muscularis externa, both the inner circular and the outer longitudinal, being mostly skeletal muscle. So if you are going to have a histological slide of the upper part of the esophagus, you're actually going to see the structures of the skeletal muscle, the striations, right? The multinucleated uh, uh, myofibers and so forth. And then the middle third is going to have both the skeletal and the smooth muscle. The lower third, it only has smooth muscle. Smooth muscle. You understand? And the esophagus is divided into thoracic esophagus and abdominal esophagus. The thoracic esophagus has no mesentery. So therefore it has what? Therefore, it has adventitia, covered by adventitia, right? Up until it pierces the diaphragm by the esophageal hiatus at the level T10. You remember from gross anatomy, right? Good. So once it is now in abdominal esophagus, it's going to be surrounded by peritoneum. So therefore, this esophagus is going to now possess serosa instead of adventitia, right? And take note, the esophagus has physiological sphincters, not anatomical sphincters. Especially the lower esophageal sphincter, it's not an anatomical, it's a physiological sphincter. Right. So that is what is important when it comes to the esophagus histology. Now let us take a look at some clinical causes regarding the esophagus. So there is what we call gastroesophageal reflux disease. So this is due to an incompetent inferior esophagus sphincter, right? That that can allow the acid of the stomach to move up into the esophagus. And this can be associated with things like heartburn and also metaplasia of the esophageal epithelium. Now let us take a look at the histology of the stomach. So the stomach is divided into four. We have the cardia, fundus, cardia, the fundus, body, and the pyloric part. The cardia is the narrow at the back, right? The fundus is that dome on the left, and it usually fills the gas. And then the body is the largest portion of the stomach, and then the pyloric part is going to be funnel shaped, right? And with some with that is going to allow the the chyme to enter the duodenum. And if you're going to see the mucosa of the stomach, it has longitudinal temporary fold, not permanent. Temporary fold, which are made of the mucosa and the submucosa, which are referred to as rugae. And this longitudinal fold, they emerge or they seem like they fuse at the pyloric part. So let's take a look. The cardia. So the cardia has simple tubular deep glands in the mucosa. And these glands, they are responsible for secreting mucus, right? Enzymes, lysosomes, and a few, you can also find few parietal cells. But the mucus that is being produced, taken out of these, is going to be alkaline in nature, right? So pits are shallower than those in the fundus and pyloric part of the cardia, right? Let's look at the fundus in the body. So the fundus in the body of the stomach, histologically, they have the same structures. They are histologically the same. Their mucosa is epithelium, which is simple columnar epithelium, with the mucus producing cell lining cells and stem cells, right? So it is what you call gastric pits and gastric glands, right? That extends into the lamina propria. You understand? So these gastric glands, they they are divided into three regions: the isthmus, the neck, and the breast. I am mainly concerned with the breast. Uh, Why? Because it is very important to understand that in the best, that's where you find that's where you find the parietal and chief cells. The parietal and chief cells, which are very important. You understand? So the parietal cells, as we're gonna see histologically, they are eosinophilic, right? And the chief cells, they are gonna be basophilic, as we're gonna see. Right, so let's just take a look at these cells. So at the neck, we have what we call mucous neck cells. They are columnar. They have short villi, microvilli, and their nucleus is basally placed, right? And they have abundant basally placed mitochondria and numerous secretory granules. And then from the neck cells, mucous neck cells, we are going to have stem cells, right, that are responsible for the regeneration of the stomach mucosa. So they are columnar, they have few organelles, and they have the capacity to differentiate into other cells. And then at the base, you have the oxyntic or parietal cells. These are round to pyramidal shaped. Their function, the parietal cells, are responsible for the production of hydrochloric acid and the gastric intrinsic factor. And it is the gastric intrinsic factor that is very important for vitamin B12 absorption, vitamin B12 absorption, right? That's why we would say that if there is surgery of the stomach or the removal of the stomach, there is going to be pernicious anemia, which is caused by lack of vitamin B12, because we no longer have the intrinsic factor that is important for the absorption of the vitamin B12 in the small intestines. The parietal cells, so they are going to have intracellular canaliculi lined with microvilli. They've abundant mitochondria. That's why they are eosinophilic. And they have a basally placed uh, nucleus, right? And you have receptors for gastrin, histamine, acetylcholine, right? And they are eosinophilic, like I said. And then we have these zymogenic cells, which are chief cells. These are the ones that produce the enzyme pepsinogen, right? They are columnar cells. These are basophilic due to abundant rough endoplasmic reticulum, right? And well-developed Golgi apparatus and numerous secretory granules. So these cells, you're going to see that they are very distinct when it comes to the glands, the gastric glands. The parietal eosinophilic, there's the chief cells or the zymogenic cells, they're going to be basophilic. Right, so the distribution of these cell types in the body and the fundus is very important, right, for you to know. So the cells that are going to be found in the isthmus are going to be your stem cells, your mucous neck cells, and some part of your parietal cells, right? And then at the neck, you're going to have the stem cells, mucous neck cells, and some of your parietal cells as well. And then at the base, the chief cells, they are mainly located at the base, right? And with some few parietal cells. So let's also look at the pylorus, the pylorus part. So the pylorus part has deeper glands than the cardia. It has branched tubular pyloric glands which are less cold, and their predominant cell, the predominant cells are the mucous neck cells that produce alkaline mucus and lysosomes. Right. We also have G cells that intercalate among these mucous neck cells, which will produce your gastrin. Right. Interestingly, interestingly, the stomach muscularis externa has three layers, like I said before. That is unique to the stomach. So you're going to have your inner oblique layer, mid-circular layer, and outer longitudinal layer, right? And these layers, they are prominent in the cardiac, right? Um, and the circular layer is more prominent in the pyloric part, forming the pyloric sphincter. Since the stomach, I said it's intraperitoneal, is going to be covered by serosa, which is a loose connective tissue covered by simple squamous epithelium, which is mesothelium. Right, so that's everything that you have to know about the histology of the stomach.